Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. I am Penna Dexter, and this week I've been at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention. Kirby is still there, and I believe we'll be back here in the studio tomorrow. He has collected a lot of great interviews that he'll air for you over the coming days, and it should be fun. I won't even give you any more hints about what that's all about, but I do want to mention that Jessica Anderson from the Heritage Foundation made a statement that I thought was very interesting. She said that critical race theory could become one of the most important grassroots fight since the Tea Party. And in the second segment, or actually the third and fourth segment of the program today, we're going to have Tim O'Hare in the studio to discuss that, really the grassroots effort that took place in South Lake, Texas. He was a big part of that. He has been, he's an attorney in the area and also run for various offices. And when he does, he always makes a splash for our values. So he'll be a lot of fun to speak with. And then later in the program, Lori Roman will join me. She's with the American Civil Rights Union. We'll talk about vaccine passports. But I'm very excited to speak with my guest this segment for the next couple segments. Her name is Sarah Parshall Perry. And if you recognize the second name there, Parshall, she is the daughter of Craig and Janet Parshall, who are people who I love and respect. And they must have had her very young because she's done so much in her career. She's legal fellow for the Edwin Meese Center for Legal and Judicial Studies at the Heritage Foundation. Before that, she worked for the Family Research Council, and she's also worked in actually the White House, actually in the Department of Education. We'll ask her about her job there. She's got her law degree from University of Virginia. And Sarah, thank you so much for joining me today.
Penna, I'm so glad to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Well, I did hear you speak on the issue of the Equality Act, so that's going to be our main topic of discussion today. But since you wrote a piece on a Supreme Court decision that came down yesterday, something we have not discussed on Point of View, but it has to do with the cussing cheerleader, as some people call her. And I want you to explain this case and what the ruling means for the freedom of student speech.
So this is a case called Mahanoy School District versus BL, and the cussing cheerleader's name is Brandy Levy. She is a former high school sophomore who took to Snapchat after failing to make the varsity cheerleading squad and expressed herself through emojis and a few choice curse words to tell her friends essentially that she was very upset at the cheerleading squad, at the school, at the administration. It was circulated to about 250 students. Someone screenshotted it, shared it with the school administration, and she was promptly cut from the JV cheerleading squad as well. So she filed suit in violation of her First Amendment as the primary claim, and ultimately, the district court, the Third Circuit, and the Supreme Court all agreed that it was impermissible censorship based on the First Amendment. But what we got from the Supreme Court was an 8-1 decision. It was written by Justice Breyer, who is, as you know, one of the few liberals, the starch liberal that is left on the Supreme Court, and he is a fan of free speech. And so to that extent, it was encouraging to see very near unanimous consensus on this free speech case. Ultimately, they had to ask the question, does our decision all the way back in 1969 in a case called Tinker versus Des Moines, does it apply here? And in Tinker, the court had decided that if there was particular speech that materially disrupts class or involves substantial disorder or invasion of the rights of others, that a school, as a government entity, could censor it in the interest of protecting the education and the rights of others. So because this was off campus, she was at a 7-Eleven down the street. She posted Snapchat. It was also social media at the time. So we're dealing with rather a novel situation. They said, does this ruling apply to an off-campus speech? And ultimately they said, yes, but only in certain circumstances. Now, I would love to have seen a wide victory for free speech and see 9 justices say it cannot apply to speech that occurs off campus. But Justice Breyer made clear that there are some circumstances in which the state will stand in place of the parent if it is worried about the rights of others. And I think automatically of cyberbullying as one of those cases that comes to mind. We know individuals now who are of the youngest generation use social media frequently, that cyberbullying is a very real problem in education. So he said this is a particular situation in that it is not only not on campus, it doesn't fulfill what we would automatically assume to be something that would either disrupt or target someone else. And
right.
So
well, it goes away in 24 hours. So, I mean, that disruption part seems to kind of fade away.
It does indeed. Now, of course, there had been a screenshot, but Justice Breyer rightly pointed out, listen, you can't censor everything a student says within the course of a 24-hour day. That's concerning to us. The parents should be in charge of what that student says when they're under parental control. So he did make a statement, Penna, that I think bears reference for your listeners, because this is very encouraging coming from a liberal justice. He said, our representative democracy only works if we protect the marketplace of ideas. Mm-hmm. This free exchange facilitates informed opinion, which when transmitted to lawmakers helps produce laws that reflect the people's will. American education are the nurseries of democracy. And I loved that phrase because what that telegraphs to me is that for religious students, for students who hold traditional Orthodox perspectives on sexual identity and sexual orientation and gender and science versus evolution, there are so many iterations of what would be considered unpopular opinions.
Yes.
Justice Breyer is ultimately saying, we don't want to censor. If given the choice, we want to make sure that we protect free expression over government interference. And to that end, it was a very encouraging decision.
Well, let me ask you about the dissent by Clarence Thomas. He was the only dissenter. Does that mean anything for what this case does for kids?
So it's interesting because Justice Thomas, I rarely, if ever, disagree with him, but he's motivated by what we automatically know as text, history, and tradition. And his philosophy was if we applied Tinker in 1969 to on-campus speech, our circumstances have changed. Now we are dealing with off-campus speech, but it should be no less applicable here. It's clear she targeted the school administration. It's clear that she targeted the cheerleading coach. It was disseminated multiple times because Justice Breyer had said, well, it occurred off campus on a social media platform. Justice Thomas said, I disagree because you could determine this to be school speech if somebody opens their Snapchat and sees a saved picture that's been circulated multiple times. So he was much more of a traditionalist in his interpretation of whether or not Tinker would apply, and he felt, under the facts of the circumstance, that Brandy Levy's speech should have been censored.
Okay, Sarah Parshall Perry from Heritage Foundation is with me. I want to mention something we posted, 11 myths about H.R. 5, the Equality Act. You might want to look at that during the break. We'll be back with more after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
If you watch congressional politics, you know the game. Pull together all sorts of funding projects that would never pass on their own, then stick them in a bill with a title like healthcare reform or COVID relief. This time the bill is referred to as an infrastructure bill. We obviously need to fix our roads and bridges. We need to upgrade our ports and airports. We need to modernize our water and sewer systems. But should we spend another $2 trillion doing this? Can't we do it for less? Senator Shelley Moore Capito thinks that we can do it for much less. Stephen Moore also thinks so and put the figure close to $600 $100 billion. But then he says we don't even need new spending to achieve that. The money easily can come from the unspent slush fund dollars inside the American Recovery Act passed back in March. Stephen Moore locates 4 pots of money that would provide the necessary funds for infrastructure improvement. Step 1 is to take $175 billion in blue state money. Most states have budget surpluses, not deficits, thanks to the stock market rally and a quicker than expected recovery from the pandemic and lockdown. Step 2 is to reassign the $129 billion in federal education dollars allocated for schools and teacher unions from 2022 to 2028. The pandemic is effectively over and schools are likely to start again in a few months. Step 3 is to stop paying an additional $300 a month in unemployment benefits. This is especially important since so many businesses are looking for employees and we shouldn't be paying people not to work. Step 4 is to declare a war on waste. There are tens of billions of dollars of outrageous spending. We can fix the nation's infrastructure without spending $2 trillion. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Racism, go to viewpoints.info/racism. That's viewpoints.info/racism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm joined by phone by Sarah Parshall Perry. She's legal fellow at Heritage Foundation. I did mention when introducing her that she served as senior counsel to the Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights at the Department of Education. Can you just tell us a bit about that, Sarah?
Absolutely. I will tell you it was a much different experience working at the Civil Rights Office as it would be under the current administration.
I imagine.
As you know, I served under President Trump, and I worked predominantly with Kimberly Ritchie and Ken Marcus. Ken Marcus left to go on to the Brandeis Center, but we were tasked with enforcing the civil rights of the nation's students. So what we're seeing right now in terms of Title VI and Title IX, to a certain extent, Title VII, but as you can see, this is an administration that's been focused almost unilaterally on civil rights and the expansive definition of what we've known to be the Civil Rights Act and enforced as the Civil Rights Act for years. And one of the things that I was tasked with doing there was interpreting and applying Title IX, which is colloquially known as the Women's Sports Bill, in light of what the Supreme Court had decided in Bostock versus Clayton County. And you remember that's the Title VII sex discrimination case coming out of the Supreme Court. So it was a wonderful experience. I have kept in touch with many attorneys who have all gone on, for the most part, to public interest legal perspectives and positions across the country, and they are working in various areas of the correct interpretation of civil rights law. So it was quite an experience and one that I'm very grateful that I have.
Well, good to know. We definitely will have you back and do an hour on that because we need to discuss those issues. But Sarah, the Equality Act, the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says it's one of the things we're considering during Pride Month. I don't think they'll really get to it because they really don't have the support yet. And it's certainly not about equality, even though it's called the Equality Act. It's about forcing the LGBTQ agenda on all Americans. But, yes, Sarah, they may try to do some sort of a compromise. And I know that you have looked deeply into that. One of those compromises, which would be fairness for all. So tell us about that.
Well, it's a very interesting and sort of anodyne-sounding compromise, right? So fairness for all is the title of this proposed compromise, and it makes a number of changes to federal civil rights law that, even though are less extreme than the Equality Act, are still going to be absolutely, in our minds, unconscionably wrong. It really does continue that narrative of forcing a new sexual orthodoxy on all Americans. Now, again, the Equality Act, just to give a highlight, 59 substantive changes to federal law, completely guts RFRA, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. So there is no right of religious exemption. It adds in what would essentially be sex discrimination under public accommodation. That means pro-life doctors, pro-life individuals are not given an opportunity to withhold services for abortions. We've got so many iterations. It would affect curriculum. It would affect public schools. It really is the most aggressive piece of federal legislation that we have seen since the Civil Rights Act in the 60s. So we know how bad the Equality Act is, but Fairness for All, again, promoted as sort of the kinder, gentler version, is still on its own a piece of sort of piecemeal death by 1,000 cuts mastery. There are more than 250 pages in this bill. It is an expansive way to try to provide different exemptions for organizations, but not individuals. And therein lies the rub for many of us, is that we would not be protected as individuals who have religious convictions that we don't want to violate. Rather, it only protects institutional structures, organizations of 15 or more. So it really does leave individuals like you and me, Penna, with absolutely no right of dissent whatsoever. Some churches are protected as long as you don't use the buildings for commercial purposes, and that may even be a basement lasagna supper to benefit a charity. Some marriage and family education providers are protected, but they can only discriminate on religious character, not on gender identity or sexual orientation. And some religious charities, but they have to receive funds through a voucher program indirectly rather than direct funding. So there are multitudes of issues with the Fairness for All Act. We are truly hoping, again, knowing that the Equality Act will not make the Senate consideration deadline before the Senate goes into recess, and knowing that they will take up budget appropriations when they come back at the end of July and into August, there has been, up to this point, not enough demonstration of consensus. So we're hopeful that that means the Equality Act will fail. But I do believe, as conservatives and as Christians, Penna, we need to focus all of our efforts now on making sure that Fairness for All, because of the way it sounds, doesn't move forward as its kinder, gentler alternative.
When I first read about Fairness for All, the thought went through my brain that the people that negotiated this from the Christian community, really through the rest of us and many organizations, and as you said, churches, they threw us under the bus. I mean, they got something for themselves, but they didn't get something. They didn't really negate the horrible parts of the Equality Act, which is really all of it, for all of us. Yes, absolutely. And I do think there may be some benign motivation. It's hard to say, Penna. We really are hoping the best. Naturally, you and I and all of us don't want anyone discriminated against because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. We are all created in the image of God. We don't want to treat anyone as less than, but we are not required under law or the natural right of who we are as religious Americans to sacrifice our convictions on the altar of a new political movement. And we certainly don't have to shove something into the civil rights panoply of laws that has not existed there prior to this point. So it really is not a kinder, gentler alternative. It chops up the Equality Act, takes out a couple of pieces, and then sort of glosses everything over with very benign terms that I am concerned may be more palatable to the individual who doesn't necessarily know to look further. I think that's really true. I don't think the average Christian in the pew really gets that the threat to religious liberty this is. Not only religious liberty, though, just people that want to live traditional lives believing that sex is, male and female, and that,
Yes.
maybe they believe in the sanctity of human life. They believe that marriage is between a man and a woman. These things that we're all still supposed to be able to believe in this world.
Yes.
People don't, they need to be able to still live that way, even though that's not the law of the land anymore.
We also know that because the left is so intent on this whole cloth acceptance of sexual orientation and gender identity as a new way of life, tantamount and requiring of the same level of protection as religious liberty, they will not take any compromise. The ACLU has actually called Fairness for All discriminatory, the Human Rights Campaign, Lambda Legal, GLAAD, all of the organizations that are front and center when it comes to advocating for trans and sexual orientation rights have all said it's discriminatory, it doesn't protect LGBTQ people. Why, as conservative Christians, should we accept fairness for all if even the hard left has said we're not going to compromise? We certainly should not be the first people to sacrifice religious freedom on the altar of political correctness and a new movement.
That would almost be unilateral disarmament. It works in our favor,
It
really,
would.
that they're against it too, I think. Well, just
It
very
absolutely would.
Yeah, very quickly before I let you go, I'm so grateful to actually be able to interview you, and I hope this is the beginning of doing many interviews, because you really, you kind of have the take on some of these issues that are so important to the culture right now that our listeners need. And ladies and gentlemen, we have put as our action item the Equality Act. We've had it up there for a while, but make it easy for you to weigh in on that. But just since you are, you focus a lot on education, tell us what the Equality Act would mean for our kids coming up K through 12.
I'm so glad that you asked, because for anybody who believes that their particular religious school or private school would not be affected, you don't have to have your children in public education. And I do, for specific reasons. Two of my children need special education services that aren't available through other avenues. But this would affect all avenues of education aside from homeschooling.
Wow.
So if you are not able to homeschool, your children would be affected in any concept. They can actually force a type of curriculum that would teach LGBTQ as part of your history, your social studies, even your science, and it doesn't have to come through reproductive health services, which is normally the sex ed talk that kids get in 12th grade. This is something that would change the way education is done.
Oh, some huge issues we're dealing with today. Thank you so much, Sarah Parshall Perry. We will talk to you again.
You can make a difference. Yes, we face big tech censorship, government overreach, biblical illiteracy, and many other ills. And while there's no single action to overcome them, no real-life Captain America to come to our rescue, it's a fact that everyday Americans, like you, are the key to turning things around. The biggest thing you have is that you care, and all you need is the encouragement and the will to stand up for what's right. Your gift of Point of View enables us to reach more people with the information and free resources they need to join you in making a real difference in our homes, at work, in our churches, and our communities. Some of our friends who are promising to double whatever you give with a $65,000 matching challenge. You give, they match. Make a difference today by visiting pointofview.net/difference or call 1-800-347-5151. Double your impact today. Make a difference by taking this first step. Pointofview.net/difference and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Penna Dexter.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm so grateful to have an in-studio guest. His name is Tim O'Hare, and he comes from, the reason he's here is because of the battle over critical race theory and just the indoctrination of students in South Lake, Texas. It's probably something you've heard about, if not here at Point of View, because we've discussed it often. Other places, it's been in the news. It's often mentioned when people are talking about critical race theory and our students. They successfully were able to take a couple of school board seats there in South Lake, Carroll School District, and also 2 city council seats and the mayor over this issue. And Tim, let me just mention, Tim is Republican Party of Texas treasurer. He also was the Tarrant County GOP chairman for a couple of years, and he was mayor of Farmers Branch. I remember interviewing him on some issues there a few years ago. He is an attorney, and he's the founder of the Political Action Committee South Lake Families PAC. He got very involved in that South Lake battle. Tim, thanks so much for joining me. Just tell me what motivated you to get involved in that battle.
Well, it's great to be here. Point of View has always been fantastic for issues that have been close to my heart. So thank you for all that you've done, and thank you for covering our battle in South Lake. So I have 4 kids. And we moved to South Lake from Farmers Branch, which was my hometown where I lived my entire life, 44 years. But we moved to South Lake because of the schools. And for those that don't know, South Lake Carroll Independent School District is one of the top 2 or 3 public school districts in the state of Texas. And people move from all over to go to those schools. So I've got 4 little girls, and 3 of them were in the schools. And we started seeing some weird things happen in the schools that were not traditional South Lake values. And we started seeing some things that were very disturbing. And then they came out with something called a Cultural Competence Action Plan. They released it on, I think it was Friday, July 31st, when half of South Lake is on vacation. Mm-hmm. They took no public input of any kind, put it out there to be voted on by the school board on that Monday, August 2nd or 3rd, whatever day that would have been, that Monday. And when we read what was in there, I mean, it read like a Columbia civics professor's dream wish list of their utopian liberal society. And some of it was just downright appalling and scary. And a group of us rose up in South Lake and said, we're not going to let this in our schools. We're going to fight this. And it was a really cool thing to see people rise up, give money, volunteer. I mean, we put together an organization in a very short time frame that, as you well know, has made national news based on the success we've had.
Well, we've discussed this before. We've discussed these elections with, taking over the school board seats. And I think our listeners are pretty well versed in, this critical race theory, this idea that, you've got to examine yourself and see how racist you are. And they're doing this to kids. Very divisive, not unifying at all. And as you said, really bringing in structural changes to our country because our country is evil and based on racism. And, so many more things that it encompasses. But I've noticed that since you had these victories, these grassroots victories, really, in South Lake, other school districts across the country are fighting these same battles. Now, some of them are probably using your blueprint. Others probably need to look at what you did so successfully. Right. But I've noticed some of the names of the places: Greenwich, Connecticut, Loudoun County, Virginia, Rapid City, South Dakota, other towns from prosperous areas. Do you think there's a reason for that areas where the school districts are some of the better districts in the country have such a battle going on? Is it because these parents are able to recognize it because they're connected or something? Or is it because they are targeting the wealthier players in the country?
Well, that's a great question. You had mentioned that your listeners know about critical race theory. I mean, it is anti-American and it is racist on its face. And it starts from the premise of guilty until proven innocent. And that's the biggest flaw in the whole theory. Why do I think more affluent communities are seeing it? I think education is controlled in large part by the left side of our country. and they are trying to get measures like critical race theory and cultural competence action plans into the public schools because they know if they can get it in a place like South Lake Carroll ISD, that other districts across the state will join in and do the same thing. And if it can pass there, well, it can pass anywhere. And I think that's why they're targeting those districts. The other thing that you're dealing with on that is they understand if critical race theory and things like that are taught in the schools, they will radically change the voter identity, what people believe 10 years from now.
It's like a bully pulpit almost.
You teach these 6-year-olds and 8-year-olds and 10-year-olds America's bad, America's evil, America started from awful things. Well, how are those people going to vote in 10 years and 12 years and 15 years, and how are they going to raise their kids to vote? That's the evil that's at the heart of this. They never stop when it comes to wanting power and wanting to change what made America great. And when you get right down to it, it's a very anti-Christian, anti-American way of doing things, and that's who is driving it. People that are anti-Christian, anti-American.
So, if you go into it a little deeper and you look at the battle that you had, I know that there were lawsuits and that it was stopped, that there's sort of a kibosh put on it, at least temporarily, and then you had these elections. So this particular plan, Cultural Competence Action, is not in effect there in South Lake now.
It is not. There's a temporary restraining order put in place by a Tarrant County District Court judge saying, school district, you cannot move forward on this plan and take action related to this plan. And the reason there's a temporary restraining order in place, it's not illegal to teach these things. It's because multiple members of the school board violated something called the Open Meetings Act. And they would say they didn't, but they were indicted by a Tarrant County grand jury. So 2 of the board members were indicted. They're currently being prosecuted by the Tarrant County DA for violating the Open Meetings Act. And sort of like the legal theory, the fruit of the poisonous tree, when they accepted this plan, which was botched, the plan was botched, the way they did it was botched, the way they posted it on the agenda was botched. But when they voted on it and talked about it by text message beforehand, they violated the Open Meetings Act, in my opinion, and in obviously the Tarrant County DA's opinion. And so because of that, that's why the judge has said you can't do this pending the outcome of the trial. In Texas, the open meetings requirements have civil penalties and criminal penalties. So the DA is doing the prosecution, but our PAC funded a lawsuit against the school district to stop it, and that's where that comes from.
Okay, so you have to make this a permanent victory, and the way to do that is to put the right players in place, right?
You got it.
And you're going to be one of those because you're running.
Well, I'm running for Tarrant County Judge, and County Judge, everybody thinks you sit in a black robe behind a bench and decide cases. Tarrant County Judge is basically like the mayor of the county, and you are responsible for the budget of the district attorney's office, the tax assessor's office, the civil courts, the criminal courts, and the hospital district. And roads and transportation issues. I mean, it's a big undertaking, and it's a job that's often fallen under the radar. And most people don't know what it was, but people learned what it was during COVID because the county judge had the power to shut down businesses and close churches, which happened both in Tarrant County, Dallas County, and in counties all over the state. So yes, I'm running for that. It's the March primary coming up in March of 2022. And then if I win the primary, of course, the general election is in November when we will hopefully vote to change the Congress. So it's a long road, but I can assure your listeners that if I'm elected Tarrant County Judge, I will never close down a business, never say one is essential over another, and I will never in a million years dream of closing down a church.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that we've gone through a year and we've seen that happen, and we've realized how much we don't want that happening anymore. But back to education, and I think that I've talked to certain people from South Lake who have said, yes, this is, we're very happy about what happened. And everyone worked very hard and gave up time. And it's really hard to do that when you are parenting children and sometimes with a job. But that's what I want to encourage people about. And we've only got a minute before the break. I want people to understand that that when there's a battle over something that's really important, like this critical race theory and how it will affect our country, we have to carve out some time. We who are believers and we who are conservatives, If we want to keep our country, we've got to sacrifice some of our leisure to do it. And so I want you to kind of just talk about how that happened and needs to continue to happen there in South Lake Carroll, because it does. I've even been involved in one in Plano 20 years ago where we really took over the school board, but Planned Parenthood came in and defeated all our people in the next election. It was over sex education. And so you have to stay on your toes. And that's something that I think as these people are gearing up to fight this, and boy, I hope it spreads. I think it will. They've got to really be sort of long-suffering in a sense, and really hold the line there. Stay with us, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter. Tim O'Hare is with me, and among other things, he founded the South Lake Families PAC. He's been in this battle over critical race theory in South Lake, Texas. And Tim, I guess I stay on this whenever we talk about these local battles that are taking place, that people need to, once they win, you can't just go home and enjoy and coast on your victory. We have to stay alert and aware, don't we?
No doubt about it. So here's what we know about people on the far left. Government, to them, they worship it. It's what they think about. It's what they do. It's what they work on. It's everything to them. And for people like us, people of faith, conservatives, we vote. We may donate money to a candidate. We might even work on a campaign. But then we go home to our businesses and to our churches and to our families. And that's an advantage that the left has always had on us is an election's over, then they're still going. They're rocking and they're doing the next thing and they're moving, and they're always advocating for more government and government to do this and government to do that. Quite frankly, they've wanted it worse than we have for many years. So I would tell your listeners, every conservative, every person of faith, your family is absolutely important. God is number one, family is number two, no question. Contributing to society, all very important. But they must carve out time, whether it's working on a campaign, running for office, giving money. They must carve out time the way the far left does. Our ideas are better. Our ideas are bring more prosperity. I mean, all the things that we know, but it's who shows up and who wants it the most. And so people have to dedicate more time, more energy, more effort to government and standing up and fighting. And one thing that's really cool that I saw from South Lake families and our efforts in South Lake is conservatives, I think, are finally getting it. And they are standing up and they are stepping up. So we've got people calling us on a daily basis from all over the country, lots in the DFW Metroplex. I've been to speak to Fort Worth groups about this, I think 4 times in the last 2 or 3 weeks. And I'm one of just a handful of people in South Lake families. Hannah Smith, who you had on the program, that was one of our school board winners. Cam Bryan, another one. They've gone all over the place. We're getting calls left and right saying, how do we do it? What do we do? And we're sharing it and giving all the time we can to people to say, here's how you do it in your district. That's what it takes for us to keep our country. We're in the fight of our lives.
I think we are.
We really are. And
I think it's the heart and soul
up.
of the nation. If the critical race theory, as you described it, if it takes hold in our public schools, I think, in a sense, freedom is finished.
Well, they are attempting to eradicate it at every turn, at every level of government. But it really, and Alan West said this, our party chairman, state party chairman in Texas, at least for another couple of weeks. Yeah. He said he thinks the most important elected position in all of America is school board. And it's always been the least paid attention to, the one that nobody ever runs for it. People get drug into it. They don't, half time they're not qualified, and they do it as a step up from serving in the PTA. But it is vitally important, right. And we see that now more than ever because it has so much influence on our kids. And those kids are going to grow up and be voters. And are they going to grow up and vote thinking America was bad and evil and awful? Or are they going to grow up loving America and thinking America's a great place where, I mean, we all know this. People are trying to get in here left and right from all over the world. You don't see anybody trying to get out of here and go somewhere else.
That's right. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to make a comment or ask Tim O'Hara a question, our number is 800-351-1212. That's 800-351-1212. I will say one way to just put your toe in if you haven't ever done it is just go to a school board meeting. Start going. Watch what they do. Because if people... it was no accident that on July 31st, in the heat of the summer here in Texas, when people try to get away and go somewhere cooler, they did this. And that's just so underhanded, and lots of things happen that way. I want to ask you one other kind of big issue. I think a lot of the agenda has to do with the morality of our children.
Yes.
The sexual morality, the orthodoxy. It's either a homosexual LGBT orthodoxy or it's traditional Christian, Judeo-Christian values. And it's going to be one or the other that really holds sway. So that's I think, at stake also.
You bet it is. Part of this cultural competence action plan that Carroll ISD put forth was to create an LGBTQ focus group. They had parents on this thing called the District Diversity Council that created this cultural competence action plan that, they were regularly trying to get LGBTQ related things into this plan and into the schools. And, we're not trying to constantly get heterosexual things into public schools. So why sex and sexual identity is they're trying to get in the schools? Because they're trying to change the culture of the United States. At the end of the day, I want our public schools teaching kids about social studies and math and reading and writing and science And why is that being taught in schools at all? It shouldn't be, and it won't be if parents will stand up and fight, elect good school board members. There's no place for that in our public schools, and there's certainly no place for it in our pre-K and our elementary schools, yet we see people trying to get it in there left and right.
Well, also, I think another thing that this whole emphasis on critical race theory and this type of sort of social justice agenda is that you end up dumbing down the curriculum. Because, for instance, I did a commentary last week on math. In California, they are basically taking away the 8th grade algebra option, and they're just because of race, because it's discriminatory to excel in math. And, this type of idea is just destructive. I mean, there's nothing really helpful about this.
I wish I could say that some things are surprising, but nothing is surprising anymore. And you've got people in that ilk that race is everything. That's all they think about is race. That's all they talk about is race. You know what? Kids don't grow up thinking about race. Kids grow up and play with kids and be friends with kids. And what critical race theory does, and a lot of these other things that leftists are trying to put in our schools, it makes them think about race. And, the other thing that doesn't get talked about much when it comes to critical race theory is you're telling a group of people of color, that you're not good enough, or you've been oppressed, or here's why you can't succeed, or here's why you haven't been successful. I mean, you're putting in their minds, you can't do it, you can't achieve, you can't rise to the top. Why would anybody want to put that in a kid's mind?
Right.
But that's what they do. And it's so destructive.
It's really for power.
It's all it's ever for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Let's see if we can take a call here, if I can get this.
All right.
Teresa in Virginia. Teresa, thank you for calling in.
Yes. I'm very passionate about this topic as a teacher and a parent in Loudoun County right now.
It's going to have to be real quick because we only have a minute.
Okay.
So just tell us what's happening there.
It's just that the parents like myself are feeling our white children are really truly being discriminated against because they're pushing such a race theory on our kids and our parents that they're really forgetting the rest of the kids. And like you had said earlier, the race thing is not something kids think about. But now because they're pushing their agenda, the kids are thinking about race when my children are very accepting of all children. So I'm very frustrated as a teacher and a parent living in a district where it's being forced down our throat, and you're really dumbing, like you said, dumbing down the curriculum. And it's been very frustrating watching this.
Teresa, thank you for giving us that report. I've been reading about Loudoun County. Well, Tim, it's just one more district. Actually, we have used up our segment.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. We'll have you back to keep on reporting on all of this.
Anytime.
And I'm so grateful that you're running for county judge because we need people with the good ideas.
Thank you very much.
Hopeless, frustrated, maybe like many of us, angry. Both business and government are supposed to serve people, but in America today, they pretty much want to run our lives. But stop and think for a moment. How much good does anger ever do? By itself, not much, if any, and the stress can harm your health. So don't let what's happening destroy you. Let it motivate you. You care about this nation, and you can do something today to make a difference. We're about halfway through 2021, and Point of View is making an impact. And with your help, we'll do much more in the next 6 months. Something else which should motivate you to act right now is that we have friends who are promising to double whatever you give with a $65,000 matching challenge. You give, they match. Make a difference today by visiting pointofview.net/difference or call 1-800-347-5151. Make double the difference. Pointofview.net/difference and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining me for the second hour of Point of View. As I mentioned earlier in the program, we have been at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention this week, and it happens to be here in Dallas, and so some folks from our staff went. Kirby's been over there all week. He's had people who have been interviewing him, and he's been interviewing people. So he's got some very special taped interviews, which he will probably air over the coming days, and you'll be able to enjoy some of the folks there. It was kind of an exciting time to be there. I got to be there for a couple of days, but I'm very happy to be behind this microphone. And, you know, we've been talking in the earlier part of the program about critical race theory, and, you know, some people, they've heard about it now. I mean, how could you not have heard about it? But what is it? You know, how do you define it? And there are a lot of pieces and parts, but it's really, it's not just diversity and sensitivity training, which we've been, we've had for years, and some of that Christians have not minded, but it's kind of on steroids now. It's an attempt to remake American society entirely by race, where some are oppressors and others are the oppressed. And, at one time, well, it's Marxism, really, from a different perspective. And so, the Marxists divided people by class, and this is just done by race. And so students are taught this, and they're having to examine themselves, and they're having to look at their country as a racist nation. And if you're white, you're by definition an oppressor. If you're a person of color, you are oppressed. And so you need this anti-racism, which is very radical, to fix that oppression. So that's what it is. And it was interesting that we had a caller from Loudoun County, Virginia, because I have a couple of articles in front of me about the battles going on there. Of course, that's just on the outskirts of Washington, D.C. And so it's good to see parents pushing back in a place like that. Well, ladies and gentlemen, my next guest, we're going to sort of switch gears here a little bit, but I think this is something you will be very interested in, the idea of a vaccine passport or some kind of mandate for getting the COVID-19 vaccine. They're saying that we are not going to have that. And in some states, including in Texas, it's been laws have been passed to prevent it. But still, I can see that coming in various ways. And with me to discuss this is Lori Roman. She's the president of the American Constitutional Rights Union. She's done a lot of things, including being executive director of ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. And she also worked at the White House Center for Faith-Based Community Initiatives at the U.S. Department of Education. And she gets her fingers in a lot of these issues. Lori Roman is with me. Lori, thank you for calling.
Hi, Penna.
Thank you for joining
it's great to be with you again.
It's good to have you. I was worried we weren't getting you, but I'm glad we did, because I really am excited to talk about this issue of the vaccine passport. I know we call it a passport, but in some parts of the culture, we could just call it a mandate, too, that you'd have to have a vaccine to participate in society. And are you worried, even though we've seen the president say there's not going to be a mandate for the vaccine, do you have any concerns that there might be one coming in from the back door?
Well, first, at the American Constitutional Rights Union, we call it vaccine handcuffs instead of vaccine passports. Passports conjure up really fun trips around the world, so we try not to use passports. So we call them vaccine COVID handcuffs or vaccine handcuffs. We are seeing them actually already be implemented. So I think the trick on words that the White House is playing is that they will not be mandating them, but what they're doing is making sure that their friends in the private sector and in the colleges and universities and corporations and companies, they're getting the word to them to implement these things. And so, as we often have warned people at ACRU, whether the government takes away your rights or whether the private sector takes away your rights makes little difference to us if we have our rights. So we're going to fight them no matter where it comes from. And we do see the advancement of fascism really in the United States, where the government is often using the private sector to do their dirty work. And so it's real. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's already been happening. We've been working with college students since last fall who first were fighting against mandatory weekly or biweekly COVID testing. And if they didn't get an app on their phone that loaded the results of their weekly or biweekly testing, they just swipe. They weren't allowed to go into the dining hall to get the food that they already paid for with their meal plan. They weren't allowed to go to their dorms or their classrooms.
Wow.
So these
I understand they sort of had it
happening.
sprung on them a lot of times. Paid tuition,
They
paid the
did.
fees, and then they tell you you can't eat unless you get the COVID test.
Exactly. It was afterwards, after they were already in school. And so it's expanded from there. So these apps on the phones have really been being pushed by the private sector. And they first kind of made their way into the colleges and universities. And these students were pushing back. We were helping them. We were writing letters to the head of for instance, the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, where students had reached out to us that didn't want to do this. But after we pushed back on the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and we took out ads and papers and we put some pressure on the Board of Regents and we did open letters in Nebraska media, what the answer that the college came up with was to not back off from being intrusive and really ignore medical choice and privacy amongst their students. What they did is they said, here's a waiver, not a waiver to get out of this, a waiver to waive away your rights. And if you don't sign this, you can't stay in school. So they were all forced before the spring semester, and they had already registered and already paid for their classes. They were forced to sign this waiver to give away their rights. So the students are coming to us and saying, what do we do? Our parents already paid for the classes, and their parents don't want to lose their money. And I would say, well, you have a choice to make. Are you going to waive away your rights to medical choice and privacy? Or are you going to give them the right to make you have this app? Because once you sign that, it's all over. You can't file a lawsuit. You can't probably get your money back. And so many parents were pressuring their students because of the almighty dollar to just shut up, sign the waiver, and go to school.
Yeah, well, it's hard to give up that hard saved up tuition money. Let me jump in here, Lori, because we're coming up on a break. I want to open the phones, 800-351-1212, because I want to know if people listening have had a situation where they felt like they are being pressured to have the vaccine. I think that would be something that we would like to hear about. So it's 800-351-1212. In a sense, it becomes discriminatory because you're not in some of these situations, you're not allowed to fully participate in whatever part of society we're talking about. So that's why the ACRU is interested in it. We will discuss this with Lori Roman after this short break.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
If you watch congressional politics, you know the game. pull together all sorts of funding projects that would never pass on their own, then stick them in a bill with a title like healthcare reform or COVID relief. This time the bill is referred to as an infrastructure bill. We obviously need to fix our roads and bridges. We need to upgrade our ports and airports. We need to modernize our water and sewer systems. But should we spend another $2 trillion doing this? Can't we do it for less? Senator Shelley Moore Capito thinks that we can do it for much less. Stephen Moore also thinks so and put the figure close to $600 billion. But then he says we don't even need new spending to achieve that. The money easily can come from the unspent slush fund dollars inside the American Recovery Act passed back in March. Stephen Moore locates 4 pots of money that would provide the necessary funds for infrastructure improvement. Step 1 is to take $175 billion in blue state money. Most states have budget surpluses, not deficits, thanks to the stock market rally and a quicker than expected recovery from the pandemic and lockdown. Step 2 is to reassign the $129 billion in federal education dollars allocated for schools and teacher unions from 2022 to 2028. The pandemic is effectively over and schools are likely to start again in a few months. Step 3 is to stop paying an additional $300 a month in unemployment benefits. This is especially important since so many businesses are looking for employees and we shouldn't be paying people not to work. Step 4 is to declare a war on waste. There are tens of billions of dollars of outrageous spending. We can fix the nation's infrastructure without spending $2 trillion. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Racism, go to viewpoints.info/racism. That's viewpoints.info/racism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. My guest is Lori Roman. She is with the ACRU, and we've been talking about vaccine requirements, specifically for college students. Lori, it's so frustrating to think about the situation you're describing where students would have paid their tuition and their fees, and then they're being required to waive away their rights to basically protest against a requirement for a vaccine. So what do you advise kids? First of all, they need to ask about the vaccine policies before they even pay their tuition. But what else?
Well, it's very widespread now. Many colleges across the country are demanding that the students prove vaccination, usually in August. Most of the requirements are before they step on campus. And so it's very widespread, and very conveniently, the colleges have announced these things after registration and after they receive the tuition. And so they're making it very difficult. At ACRU, we have phone calls and emails every single day from parents and students of parents of college students who do not want their kids to get the vaccination. They realize that the children at that age group are very low risk for COVID death or even serious consequences from COVID. So we're talking to parents every single day. So there aren't very many options right now, but here's what they are. There's, in every instance that I know, there is a possibility to get a religious waiver or a medical waiver. There are procedures within each college that are a little bit different for getting that, but they do have, in every case that I know, they have offered that. This is a bigger problem that we're fighting at a big level, but while we're fighting it at a big level, it's important for parents to just protect their own kids and their own medical choices and privacy. So go ahead and get that waiver as fast as you can and get that paperwork done. If
I
they
guess
do
so.
not grant the waiver, then there should be procedures at the college, and they're different at every college, to get your money back, where you can try to go to a college that doesn't require that. Now, we don't at ACRU tell people whether to take the vaccine or not. What we do say is whether you like the vaccine or you don't like the vaccine, we should all agree that everyone should have medical choice and medical privacy. But
Right.
one thing that has changed and I've been saying that for months and months and months now, but the more calls I get now, the more worried I am that parents just don't have the information they need about potential side effects. And I had a heartbreaking call from a woman yesterday whose son took a vaccination, a 17-year-old son took the vaccination so that he could walk in person to get his high school diploma. He's to graduate tomorrow. And he's one of the
They wouldn't
men
allow
that
them
has
to go through their graduation without the vaccine?
Yes, they either had to have the vaccine or a recent COVID test showing that they were free from that. But if they didn't want to wear a mask, they had to have the vaccine. He took the vaccine. His mother didn't really want him to take it, but he took it. And he's been in ICU for 7 days.
Wow.
They almost lost him out of respect for the family, because I just talked to her last night. They have not decided whether to go public yet or not. They'll decide next week after they've had some time to contemplate this. He got out of ICU last night, and he's going to survive. But his life has changed. I mean, for the next 6 months, he can do no activities whatsoever. He has an enlarged heart, and it is very serious. And so I guess what I'm saying is I'm adding to my admonition that we should have medical choice and privacy we should also have full information so that parents can have all the information they need to make good decisions for their kids. And these college students are smart. They can also, after they're 18, they can gather the information. But I think people are suppressing the information, and it's only fair to let people make an informed decision.
Absolutely. I mean, we are now just getting these little trickles of news about the heart inflammation that affects especially that age that you're talking about, young men. And, I mean, they're finally saying something, but they're not saying a lot, and they're saying it's very, very rare. And you just wonder. So thank you for sharing that. Lori, what about states passing bans on vaccine mandates? And, what about, because there are some states that have done this, several states. Are they, what do those bans mean? Because it seems like you could still, as a private company or organization, you could still require, or, maybe as a condition for employment, require a vaccine, even with those state laws, couldn't you?
Yes, and we're seeing this all the time too. We also get phone calls from employees who are either coerced or forced into taking vaccinations to keep their jobs. Kettering University in Flint, Michigan, hometown, has quite a coercive plan in place, and we were leaked information from Kettering University. They're making employees who have taken the vaccine, on their badge that they wear all day, every day, they have a little gold star that they were vaccinated, and those who didn't get the vaccination don't have a little gold star. So this is like medical apartheid. It's also a huge infringement of medical privacy and choice. And we're getting calls every day from people who feel coerced. So big picture.
So what about that, though? Because if you're a private company, don't you have the right to require certain things of your employees?
Well, what we're doing now at ACRU, American Constitutional Rights Union, is we are, because we're inundated, this is overwhelming. We have so many people contacting us now because not that many people are working on this issue. We are in the process of making a template letter for people that we're going to put on our website, because we have sent letters and we can't really keep up right now. But we sent letters to employers that say, it has come to our attention that you are employing coercive methods and or you are not respecting medical choice and privacy, or whatever the situation is. And we want to remind you that you could potentially face some legal liability if you force someone to get a vaccination and they end up having side effects. So we're just telling them that although they might feel they can do this in some instances, it doesn't mean it's a good idea. And there could be PR backlash. There could be lawsuits. If one of their employees gets sick, it could come back on them. And so there are things that you can do. Some of these letters just highlight, and then there's always PR, giving bad PR. I will say personally, I'm not much of a boycott person, but any company that wants to push back on me before I would obtain goods or services for them, and they want to know my medical information, I will never do business with that company again, never. So I think here's the power. You ask your state legislators to protect you. That's the first thing. That's where the protection is going to come at a bigger level. You push back on your employer or the college or whoever it is, even, maybe someplace you're shopping. You have to push back. You have to be noisy. You have to implement PR techniques, perhaps boycott techniques, perhaps protest techniques where you've got a sign out front saying, I will shop here. But you have to push back, because where does this end? I mean, what next will they tell us we have to do? What's the next hoop we have to jump through to be good little comrades and all do the exact same thing? It's really getting out of hand, and I think it really is a real beginning of fascism in our country, where the private sector is taking away our rights, and they're doing it often with the encouragement and the nudging of the government. For instance, you just saw Major League Baseball pull their All-Star game out of Atlanta within 48 hours after President Biden said, gee, I think that MLB should pull their All-Star game out of Atlanta because, we're just election law. That's a perfect example of the private sector doing things at the bidding of the government to hurt the constitutional rights or freedoms or liberties of American people. And at American Constitutional Rights Union, we're not going to stand for it just because the private sector does it. I mean, if you try to harm Americans, we're not going to take it lightly, no matter who's doing it.
Well, listen, I'm so glad you're there. And I know that, it's going to take sort of a multiplication effect to deal with all the cases now of people who are running into this. So, I hope that can happen. But I thank you so much for what you're doing, Lori, and also for joining me today to talk about this.
Thank you, Penna.
That's Lori Roman. She is with the ACRU, American Civil Rights Union. And, COVID-19 is long after the virus has settled down and waned. We're going to be dealing with these issues of discrimination and freedom that may be ongoing. So we need to pay attention. Well, ladies and gentlemen, for the next half hour, we're going to talk about this issue. If you have any reports about vaccine requirements or any about critical race theory in your schools or in your life, give us a call, 800-351-1212.
You can make a difference. Yes, we face big tech censorship, government overreach, biblical illiteracy, and many other ills. And while there's no single action to overcome them, no real-life Captain America to come to our rescue, it's a fact that everyday Americans, like you, are the key to turning things around. The biggest thing you have is that you care, and all you need is the encouragement and the will to stand up for what's right. Your gift of Point of View enables us to reach more people with the information and free resources they need to join you in making a real difference in our homes, at work, in our churches, and our communities. Some of our friends who are promising to double whatever you give with a $65,000 matching challenge. You give, they match. Make a difference today by visiting pointofview.net/difference or call 1-800-347-5151. Double your impact today. Make a difference by taking this first step. Pointofview.net/difference and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Penna Dexter.
Welcome back to Point of View. When I was speaking with Tim O'Hare earlier in the program about the battle in South Lake, Texas, over indoctrination into sort of this Marxist critical race theory, we had a caller from Loudoun County, Virginia, and I want to talk about the battle going on there. But I also want to open the phones for you to report on anything you might be seeing in your school district, 800-351-1212, and also have you experienced any kind of pressure for the vaccine in your job or your school or any part of your life for getting it. I know a lot of people are encouraging others to get the vaccine, and it's actually, in my mind, it's a positive development for the country that it was developed and the people can get it. It causes the economy to be opened up. But I think everyone in America should have a choice on whether they get it or not. It should not be used as a bludgeon for people. And, I personally, I'm pretty discriminating about vaccines most of the time because I worry about what you're putting into your body. But, I just think that this is a really an individual issue with regard to whether you get it or not. And I hope that people don't feel forced into doing it. I think, if you do it, if you make a calculation, well, I'm worried about it, but because of this or this or this, I don't want to be a person that passes COVID-19 on to someone else, to my family or whatever, then you make those calculations, but you should be able to make them yourselves and not under penalty of losing your job. Now, you might want to call in and talk to me about healthcare, because that's an area where I do think there's a requirement at some healthcare institutions to have the vaccine. Although I've heard of a lot of healthcare workers that aren't getting it. So, if you're in healthcare, I'd love to hear your experiences with it. I also want to send you to pointofview.net to just get some good information today for the things that we have been talking about. Earlier in the program, we talked about the Equality Act with Sarah Parshall Perry, and there are some articles that she's got from Heritage Foundation there. One of them is 11 myths about H.R. 5, the Equality Act. It's just so well put together from Heritage Foundation. So you might want to look at that. It looks like it won't be voted on because the Democrats, it seems to be a very, very partisan divide on that issue. And so it probably won't be voted on in June, even though they would like to do it during, quote unquote, Pride Month. But still, it's been out there for months. It's a huge goal of the left. And so it'd be really good to read this. It's very informative. And then there's a piece that Sarah Perry wrote about Fairness for All, which is the kinder, gentler Equality Act, quote unquote. It's not really. And then there's an article about the election in South Lake and how that all came down and how that happened. And so, you might want to go to pointofview.net. One other thing you can do is weigh in on the Equality Act. It's at our action, our Take Action button here on the website. So we've got a lot for you there at pointofview.net. So take advantage of it. And let's go to the phones and speak with some of the folks that have been calling in. Let's go to, first of all, Georgia and speak with Karen. Hi, Georgia. Thanks for calling. Or hi, Karen. Thanks for calling in. Are you there? I don't seem to be able to hear her. Let me see if I can get her back. I'll get somebody else. John is calling in from KBJS. Are you there, John?
Oh, yeah. Hi, Penna.
Hi. Thanks for calling.
Yes, y'all do such a fine job. I just want to remind everybody, every single American that's listening to my voice right now, if you feel in any way that you do not want to take something or do something and you feel that you're being forced to do that, that is duress. And it's directly affecting our society. And people need to back off whatever industry that they're working in. They need to put their employers on notice that they don't have the right to force you to do something that you do not, and it is protected by the Constitution, to do something against your will. And that is duress. So I just want to leave that with everybody and make sure they understand that they don't have to be forced to do something that they do not want to do. And especially if the employer is starting to, says anything about putting their employment as their employment being
contingent on them doing this.
Yeah, that's especially illegal, and that's even more duress.
So that's the question I have, John.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you think about this? Is that if you are a healthcare worker, for instance, or if you're, and I'm thinking more even at the height of the pandemic, when there was a lot of contagion going around, to require those that work there, or say, could you, we need to transfer you, or this job is not appropriate for you anymore if you're not going to get the vaccine. I mean, what about all of that?
Well, first and foremost, especially in the healthcare industry, I've been doing a lot of research about this COVID virus ever since December 2019.
Have you?
And yes, especially I watched MedCram on YouTube, and Dr. Schultz on MedCram was really early on sounding the alarm in 2020 and in late, I believe, in 2019 December. And so the healthcare industry should really know that, one, the fatality rate for this virus is still low, less than 1%. And has been throughout this whole epidemic, this whole last year. And number two, if they don't know about ivermectin and about vitamin D3 and about hydrochloroquine and how that those components of treatment actually help zinc get into the cell to fight all viruses, to shut them down, and it just amazes me as far as the mask is concerned. I own a business where we do cake decorating, and my cake decorator has one of those black polyester masks, and she used that to decorate a cake, and it had black, ink that she was using, black color gel, and after she took her mask off, she sneezed, and it was in her mucus. The black was all, it went right through the mask. So if you can think that one atomized particle of color gel can get through a mask, how much more can a virus get through, the mesh? And it's so many times smaller. The only time the mask could help is if you're sneezing or coughing, and in that case, it probably would help because the virus doesn't come through the mask. It's attached to, some mucus or a water droplet. But even after that, Anyway, I'm sorry, I don't mean to talk too much.
No, I'm glad you did talk. And fortunately, I'm just so happy to be mask free. But, masks, like before COVID, when I would get the flu and I knew I was going to be cooking food or going around my family, I would just tie a bandana around my face, just intuitively thinking that it might stop, my family from getting it. And I don't know if it's true or not. It was just intuitive for me. So that's very unscientific. And I appreciate all the research, and thank you for sharing that with us, John. We appreciate it. And we're going to continue to take your calls here at Point of View, 800-351-1212. I've just got about a minute, but let's go to Pam in Georgia and let you at least get started. Hi, Pam. Thanks. I'm glad we got you.
Thank you very much. I'll be brief. What I want to know are why are employers requiring people who have had COVID, who can prove that they've had it by producing antibodies and certificates from their doctors, and yet they're told if you don't have your vaccination, you have to wear a mask?
I don't know why. I really think that this is another unscientific opinion of mine, that if you've had COVID, you probably have the best kind of immunities that you could have, better than the vaccine. So I would think that would be protective. And maybe down the road, if they were able to do massive antibody testing to find out if people truly do have antibodies even months and months after the having had COVID. That might help to alleviate what you've mentioned, what's going on. I know that with my own father, he's 93, and he was tested positive, but he never had a symptom. So I had him take the antibody test, and he did have the antibodies. And so, great. But, there's a lot of pressure for people still to have the vaccine, even if they've had COVID. And maybe we'll find out someday that that was just overkill and really not helpful. But Pam, thank you for mentioning that. I appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll continue to take your calls on both vaccine mandates and also critical race theory, especially in the schools. Right after this, stay with us for more of Point of View.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to the final segment of Point of View. We're talking about vaccine mandates, vaccine passports, and we're asking the question to folks that want to call in, have you experienced any kind of pressure to get the vaccine other than just encouragement to do so? 800-351-1212. I'm going to go to Karen in Georgia in just a minute because we lost her and we got her back, so that's good. And I wanted to mention that Ted Cruz, first of all, I know there are some states that actually have issued their own vaccine passports to do things in the state. New York is one of those. And so, Wow, that's really heavy-handed in a sense. Probably not a good idea. I will say that there is legislation Ted Cruz introduced in the Senate that would prohibit these passports in the states. He said it would protect medical privacy and protect the right to make a choice about whether or not to get a vaccine. He says the way this bill is structured is it works within existing civil rights laws. And so those laws prevent discrimination on race or sex. What this does is it also prevents discrimination based on your choice of whether or not to get a vaccine. And certainly, it was developed very fast in emergency circumstances. It's helped the economy open up. It's helped protect us and keep us safe. But even Ted Cruz says there are risks that are entailed with that. And we just heard about one with the heart inflammation that's taking place among some young men that get the vaccine. And also, they use the Americans with Disabilities Act in this law because it does protect people that have disabilities from being discriminated against, and that could tie into this, allowing a reasonable accommodation from an employer. So these are things that could protect people whose employers would like them or trying to pressure them to get the vaccine. And also the Biden administration has said they're not going to be mandating vaccine passports. That's a good thing, and Well, it's good to have legislation, I think, on the issue, too. Let's go to Georgia now and speak with Karen. Hi, Karen. Thanks for calling. You're on Point of View.
Hey, I live in Barrett County, and I know my daughter's son, my grandson, they're sending out letters to the parents saying that if they're from 8th grade above, that they have to have the vaccine or continue to wear masks, and they'll have to continue to wear masks even in the lower grades. But Governor Kemp lifted all that. Mm-hmm. I don't understand why it's continued to be the issue, and especially if the children weren't, compromised to begin with. They didn't have it.
Yeah, well, in the schools, I know that companies, once a governor lifts the mandate, it's not that companies can't require masks for people to come into their facility, but they don't have to. They don't have to anymore. It's not, a mandate from on high. And I don't know what the situation is with the schools. I think the school, of course, it's summer now, is going to have to deal with the governor's office. I think, the state is going to have to deal with the schools that are still requiring masks. There's going to have to be some kind of, negotiation going on here between schools. It's a public school, right?
Right.
Yeah, between them and the state, because every state, has a different policy, and most of the states have lifted their mask mandates now. I mean, I was in New York a couple of weeks ago, and it was actually a lot of establishments made you wear a mask, or they wore them, but it wasn't, it's not even a requirement, even in New York. So I just think the school's going to, in fact, you should probably complain to the school.
Yes. Well, we are complaining but it's like you said, the girl before, that you have to
Lori Roman
go to the board. Yes, because I listened to all of her. She was very good.
Yes.
And, you got to go to the board, and I'm going to call her too. So
yeah, call her. And we have her information at pointofview.net.
Yes.
Of course, she's getting all kinds of calls, and that's what's happening all over the country. So I'm glad you called, because you're just representative of probably thousands of people that are dealing with this now. It's really hard.
Well,
you're right about kids, though. I mean, I think the younger you are, the less it should be likely that you would have the vaccine, because the trade-off.
Push it.
Yeah, they are. They are. I know that.
And you know what? It makes you wonder when a pharmaceutical company will not give anything away free, like insulin, EpiPens, blood thinners, chemotherapy drugs. Why in the hell are they giving these vaccines away free?
Well,
is their
I don't
alternative?
know. I don't necessarily know that it's totally free. I think it's more of a it has to do with I think they're still getting compensated, but it's just not from the person getting the vaccine.
But nobody knows how they're being compensated.
Yeah, I don't know how, but I think this, I can't answer that question, but I think the government is actually remunerating them for doing this. It's part of the whole COVID package.
Yeah, there's somebody getting paid for it.
Right. They're not going to do it for free. They're going to profit handsomely from it.
Oh, yeah. Well,
all right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. I appreciate your call. Let's go now to Colorado and speak with Daryl. Hi, Daryl. Thanks for calling.
Hello, thank you, and thank you for a wonderful program.
Well, you're welcome. I'm glad you're listening.
Yes, all the time. I just wanted to let your listeners know that in the state of Colorado, the governor's office has mandated that the state health department start calling people. They started this last Monday and are calling and strongly encouraging people who haven't yet got the vaccine to get the vaccine.
Really?
And,
so they know who has
yes,
it, and they know who hasn't had it, and they're calling.
Well, I don't know if they're basing it on that, but I do know that I received a call on Tuesday, and the poor lady that I talked to didn't have any answers for me about the myocarditis that's been happening and about natural immunity and any of that. All she could say was that we strongly encourage you to get the safe and effective vaccines.
Okay.
And I think this is being paid for by our taxpayer dollars in Colorado, and it's urging us to get them. And I think in some way it came off to me as being kind of a strong arm tactic from my state government.
It sounds like it. I don't like the feel of it at all. I really don't. And, that's another area. I think some of these things, they ought to hear from us. We ought to let your state legislator know that you got this call, that you don't like getting the call, you don't like the idea of paying for the government to be calling people, and they ought to hear the citizens don't like this. That would be my suggestion. And again, as Lori said, you have no obligation to get it. Pardon me?
I have called my legislator, and I've even called my state legislators, and they're in the minority, and they're just flat out ignored in the state of Colorado. So
yeah, your state's going more and more to the left, isn't it?
Extremely left. Yes,
absolutely beautiful state.
Yes,
it's very sad. I'm sorry to hear that, but you know what? You still you are a citizen, you're a taxpayer, so you ought to at least take advantage of the lines of communication that are there. Perhaps starting writing about it, newspapers. Something like that.
I have considered that, except that I am busy with a full-time job and running a business. I don't.
Well, that happens.
Really have that time.
Absolutely right. Okay. Well, thanks, Daryl. Appreciate your call. Ladies and gentlemen, that is exactly what Tim O'Hare and I were talking about earlier, that conservatives, we are busy with our lives, with our families, making a living. And so it's hard to carve out the time to be involved in the political arena. But at this point in our society and our history, it's crucial that we do so. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for listening today, and we'll see you tomorrow for our weekend edition.
How does the news make you feel? Hopeless, frustrated, maybe like many of us, angry? Both business and government are supposed to serve people, but in America today, they pretty much want to run our lives. But stop and think for a moment. How much good does anger ever do? By itself, not much if any, and the stress can harm your health. So don't let what's happening destroy you. Let it motivate you. You care about this nation, and you can do something today to make a difference. We're about halfway through 2021, and Point of View is making an impact. And with your help, we'll do much more in the next 6 months. Something else which should motivate you to act right now is that we have friends who are promising to double whatever you give with a $65,000 matching challenge. You give, they match. Make a difference today by visiting pointofview.net/difference or call 1-800-347-5151. Make double the difference. Pointofview.net/difference and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.